For decades, this square concrete block with machine gun turrets at its corners has projected an image of absolute security. People have come to regard it as the most secure vault on the planet, where the tangible wealth of an entire empire lies behind steel doors.
Popular culture has turned this structure into an impregnable bastion, synonymous with the word guarantee.
But the granite walls and steel protect an illusion that has long since become more important than the metal itself. Hidden inside is not merely a repository of bullion, but an instrument of brutal psychological control, the foundation of global trust in paper money. The vault was created to isolate physical weight, but in the end, it isolated the very truth about the financial system. By the end, it will become clear why the real value of this bunker is measured not in ounces of gold, but in the number of armed divisions surrounding it.
The true function of the facility is to conceal the fact that material security no longer matters.
It all began at a time of deep crisis, when the site of the current military base was nothing more than damp earth in the foothills of the Appalachians. The Great Depression paralyzed the economy, forcing citizens to withdraw gold coins from bank vaults en masse. The state was losing control over the lifeblood of the financial system, as gold was being hoarded under mattresses and in private stashes. In 1933, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, prohibiting private ownership of monetary gold under penalty of imprisonment. Physical gold was forcibly confiscated from the public in exchange for paper currency. Tons of gold coins poured into the vaults of the Federal Reserve System, creating an unprecedented physical problem. The bank vaults in New York and Washington were simply not designed to bear such a colossal weight of concentrated, lead-heavy metal. The floors of old buildings began to sag dangerously, threatening to bring tons of gold crashing down right onto the subway lines.
The government found itself the owner of a gigantic dead weight that was physically destroying the infrastructure.
The idea of hiding the stockpile in existing natural caves was rejected due to the inability to control humidity. Constant dampness threatened to destroy not the metal itself, but the wooden pallets and steel racks on which it rested. The project involved building a ground-level bunker from scratch, where every cubic meter of space would be governed by the mathematics of weight. The concept of a safe hidden inside a bank building evolved into a freestanding fortress. This was an unprecedented case in history where architecture was created not for people, but for inanimate matter. Metal became the primary and sole client of the construction, dictating the thickness of the walls and the density of the soil. In this space, people were viewed merely as temporary service staff, security guards, or porters. The building itself was designed as a deaf, blind monolith without windows, denying the external environment. The bureaucratic machine operated under immense political pressure, demanding an immediate solution to the problem of overloaded basements.
Treasury officials rushed the engineers, forcing them to make decisions literally on the fly.
Compromises made during the design phase laid the groundwork for hidden risks that would only manifest decades later. The body of the future fortress began to take shape out of fear of losing control over the economy. The geography of the United States was meticulously studied through the lens of paranoia and military pragmatism. Every potential location was rejected if it was too close to major metropolitan areas or state borders. The country's economic engine required the most remote and secure corner of the continent. This corner was found on the grounds of an active military camp in the very heart of the country. The Fort Knox military base in Kentucky perfectly met all of the Treasury Department's criteria. It was located west of the Appalachian Mountains, which provided a natural shield against a hypothetical attack from the Atlantic. The Army garrison already stationed in the area ensured the round-the-clock presence of tens of thousands of armed soldiers. The mere proximity to tank divisions made the future bunker the most heavily guarded facility on the planet. Over 4,000 cubic meters of special granite from North Carolina were ordered for the construction of the outer walls.
The granite blocks were laid with precision, forming an outer shell capable of withstanding a direct hit from an artillery shell.
A 1-meter-thick layer of reinforced concrete was poured between the granite cladding and the interior space, Steel spirals were added to this concrete during the pouring stage to shatter the drills of potential robbers. The interior consisted of a two-story steel box, literally suspended inside the granite sarcophagus. A narrow observation corridor was left between the outer walls and the vault itself. Security guards could continuously patrol this perimeter, visually monitoring the integrity of the vault's steel walls. The closed geometry of the corridors eliminated any blind spots. The building's exterior appeared deceptively simple, resembling a massive monument devoid of architectural flourishes. The smoothness of the granite concealed the colossal tension of the internal steel reinforcement. 4 machine gun turrets at the corners of the roof left no doubt as to the structure's true purpose.
Fort Knox became the physical embodiment of state paranoia and fear of chaos.
By the end of 1936, the construction phase was nearing completion, leaving behind a gigantic empty reservoir. The building awaited its filling, remaining a cold and lifeless space. The most difficult stage lay ahead, installing the mechanism that was to seal this concrete bag shut. The vault door was to become a masterpiece of engineering and the ultimate symbol of impregnability. The heart of the entire structure was the main armored door, commissioned from a specialized safe company in Pennsylvania. Its design took almost as long as the construction of the complex's exterior walls. It was not just a locking mechanism, but a massive steel airlock weighing 20 tons. The door was designed to hermetically seal the entrance, withstanding the pressure of a directed blast and the effects of thermal cutters. Transporting this monster from Pennsylvania to Kentucky turned into an extremely complex logistics operation. Standard railroad flat cars could not withstand such a concentrated load on a single axle. A special train was required, which traveled at minimum speed to avoid derailment.
The military blocked railroad crossings along the entire route, ensuring unimpeded passage for the secret cargo.
Installing the door into the concrete opening required micron-level precision, unattainable under normal field conditions. The slightest misalignment of the axis would have meant that the 20-ton door leaf simply would not have budged. Engineers used optical levels and blocks of ice to lower the steel frame smoothly onto the foundation. The ice melted, settling the gigantic structure, millimeter by millimeter, into the prepared grooves. Inside the main vault were dozens of isolated compartments, each secured by its own armored door. These doors also weighed tons and required special rail guides to open. The interior architecture resembled a prison block, where the cells were intended for lifeless ingots. The system was designed so that even if the main entrance were breached, the robbers would become trapped in the internal labyrinth. The installation of multi-ton structures revealed the first signs that the facility was operating at the limits of physics. The concrete walls around the doorway had to be additionally reinforced with steel bands to prevent micro cracks from forming.
The mass of metal inside the building began to dictate its own terms, forcing a reassessment of the structural calculations right in the middle of installation.
Solving one problem immediately created the need to reinforce adjacent sections. Now that the steel trap was ready, all that remained was to fill it with bait. The Fort Knox vault stood empty, like a hungry stomach, awaiting the arrival of the nation's most valuable assets. All that ultra-strong armor and multi-level secrecy made no sense without a gold backing. The largest operation in human history to move physical wealth was about to begin. In January 1937, an unprecedented logistical operation began, given a secret military code name. The United States gold reserves were to travel hundreds of miles from the coast to the hills of Kentucky. For the transport, the Postal Service allocated special armored rail cars, which were typically used to carry particularly valuable cargo. These rail cars were further reinforced with steel plates, turning them into mobile safes on wheels. Each train was guarded by hundreds of armed regular Army soldiers equipped with Thompson submachine guns. Secret Service agents were stationed along the entire route, blocking railroad crossings. Bridges were pre-inspected by sappers for explosive devices, and Army reconnaissance planes circled overhead. The movement of the trains turned the country's usual transportation arteries into militarized exclusion zones. Inside the vault, the ingots were stacked on massive racks, forming dense, solid walls of metal. Each new shipment increased the load on the bunker's interior floors, causing the steel beams to groan deeply. Engineers watched with alarm as the floor sagged microscopically under the pressure of thousands of tons of yellow cargo. The building began to bear the load for which it was built, and that load proved merciless. By mid-1937, a significant portion of the country's monetary gold was locked away in the depths of Kentucky. The facility had swallowed the wealth of an entire nation, becoming the most expensive square kilometer on the planet. But along with the metal, the very concept of free circulation of gold was sealed inside the concrete bunker. The vault turned into a black hole from which the bars never returned to the market economy. The operation to transfer the metal created a lasting illusion of complete government control over the situation. The press published enthusiastic reports about the indestructibility of the new fortress, reassuring the anxious public. The image of Fort Knox became firmly entrenched in the public consciousness as a synonym for absolute, rock-solid reliability. The government successfully sold citizens a picture of security in exchange for the real gold coins that had been taken from them. However, this outward stability harbored the first seeds of future technological and ideological fragility. By concentrating a massive amount of gold in a single location, the government created the perfect target for a full-scale attack. The massive steel door provided reliable protection against bandits with dynamite, but the nature of the threat was rapidly changing. The world stood on the brink of a global conflict for which these granite walls were not prepared. The relative calm of the complex early years was merely a brief respite before the real trials. The scent of impending war forced a re-evaluation of the capabilities of this steel sarcophagus buried in the ground. The bunker was about to take on a burden of a completely different nature, one not measured in ounces. An era was dawning when the protection of documents became more important than the protection of precious metals. The outbreak of World War II in Europe sparked panic in Washington regarding the fate of historical artifacts. The bombing of London demonstrated that traditional museums and archives were completely defenseless against air raids. The US government realized that the original copies of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were lying under fragile glass in the Capitol. There was an urgent need to hide the foundation of American statehood in the safest place possible. In late 1941, immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor, a special train secretly departed from Washington. Inside boxes that looked ordinary were documents constituting the legal foundation of the country's existence. They were taken to Fort Knox and placed in empty sections of the gold vault, far from the coast. The building, constructed exclusively for dead metal, suddenly became an ark for parchment. Gold reserves from European countries fleeing the Nazi advance also began to be secretly transported to Fort Knox. Tons of Norwegian, French, and British gold crossed the Atlantic under the cover of convoys. The bunker began to function as a global vault, straining its logistical capacity. The amount of available space was rapidly shrinking, turning the vault into a gigantic, tightly packed warehouse. In addition to documents and foreign gold, other strategic reserves were also brought down into the Kentucky vaults. There were tons of industrial morphine needed for military hospitals in the event of a total continental war. The vault was losing its narrow specialization, becoming a dumping ground for strategic reserves in case of the end of the world. The initial strict order was being disrupted, giving way to a chaotic accumulation of resources. The war had turned the area around the base into a seething cauldron of armored forces preparing to be sent overseas. Tank guns roared on the firing ranges just a few kilometers from the bunker's granite walls. The vibrations from the heavy equipment constantly tested the strength of the vault's foundation, causing the plaster to crumble. The bunker was at the epicenter of a constant mechanical earthquake generated by its own army. By 1945, Fort Knox had held up, but its internal ecosystem had become far more complex and vulnerable. The forced adaptation to different types of cargo showed that even the most rigid systems are forced to make compromises. The end of the war marked the return of the documents to Washington, but a residue of paranoia remained forever. The building was once again left alone with its gold, yet its symbolic significance began to transform inexorably. The armor, which had seemed the pinnacle of engineering genius, suddenly became an archaic relic of the past. A new era was beginning, in which the old walls would have to learn to protect new myths. The dawn of the nuclear age rendered the concept of passive concrete defense hopelessly obsolete in just a few years. A Soviet ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead could wipe Fort Knox off the face of the earth in a fraction of a second. Granite walls designed to withstand a direct hit from an artillery shell would simply vaporize at the epicenter of a nuclear explosion. The country's entire strategic gold reserve risked turning into a radioactive pool of molten metal. The government realized the monstrous vulnerability of storing its primary economic asset in a centralized above-ground bunker. However, moving tens of thousands of tons of gold underground or distributing it across the country was too expensive. The physical weight of the accumulated reserve became an unmovable anchor, preventing any maneuvering under the new conditions. The vault found itself held hostage by its own mass and its inability to evacuate quickly. At the same time, quiet, invisible processes of infrastructure degradation were taking place inside the bunker. Diesel generators installed back in the 1930s began to malfunction, requiring constant repairs. Ventilation shafts became clogged with dust, and steel structures were covered with a light coating of surface rust from condensation. Maintaining life within this aging mechanism required ever-increasing financial injections. Modernization of internal systems was often carried out using crude methods directly over the old utilities. New communication cables were laid right across the granite corridors, disrupting the strict geometry of the original design. Every technical intervention compromised the original airtightness, punching new holes in the armor. Attempts to adapt the old structure to new technological standards only made the system more fragile. The psychological strain on the vault's staff grew as they were locked in underground corridors under the constant threat of a nuclear strike. Guards served in a confined space, aware that in the event of war, they would burn alive along with the bullion. This invisible human cost of maintaining the myth remained outside the scope of official, boastful reports. The system demanded absolute obedience and silence from those who maintained it. By the late 1960s, the outward calm of Fort Knox stood in stark contrast to the seething economy. The world stood on the brink of a massive financial upheaval that would render the physical function of these concrete walls obsolete. The gold standard system was cracking at the seams under the pressure of global markets and printed paper dollars. The vault was preparing to undergo the most radical transformation of its very essence, without changing outwardly. The economic reality of the early 1970s dealt a crushing blow to the original purpose of Fort Knox. The United States was printing more dollars than it could back with the gold stored in the vaults of Kentucky. Foreign nations began aggressively demanding the exchange of paper banknotes for actual yellow bars of gold. The physical reserve was dwindling, threatening to completely empty the vaulted chambers within a few years. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made the historic decision to unilaterally sever the link between the dollar and gold. This event, known as the Nixon shock, forever changed the rules of the global economy. Gold instantly transformed from the foundation of the monetary system into an ordinary, albeit precious commodity traded on the market. Paper money came to be backed solely by confidence in the state's military and economic power. It was during this period that the object began to be imbued with a mystical status in popular culture. Hollywood films cemented the image of the bunker as an impregnable stronghold, shaping the narrative the government needed. The less real significance remained in the gold reserve, the more aggressively the invulnerability of its storage facility was promoted. The media facade became more important than the actual engineering condition of the floors and utilities. The decision not to sell off this dead stock came at a hidden cost to the state budget. Maintaining the armored monster, regulating the climate, and securing the perimeter, all of this required millions of dollars annually. The Treasury paid the electricity bills to guard what was no longer money. The bunker became a financial parasite that could not be destroyed because of its sacred status. The authorities found themselves trapped by their own policy of total secrecy and isolation of the facility. Ignoring the rumors was becoming dangerous as they undermined basic trust in government institutions. An unprecedented step was required, one capable of lifting the veil of secrecy without breaching the security perimeter. A plan was drawn up for a one-time operation designed to silence the critics once and for all. Politicians decided to open the armored door to prying eyes for the first time in decades. It was a necessary measure, an attempt to save the system's reputation at the cost of partially losing its mystical aura. The upcoming event was being staged as a large-scale production with clearly defined roles and a strict schedule. The bunker was preparing to receive the most unwelcome of audiences, politicians and journalists. In September 1974, an unprecedented group of congressmen and selected journalists arrived at the military base. Their goal was to conduct a visual audit of the gold reserves to dispel the suspicions that had accumulated in society. The operation was staged down to the smallest detail to minimize risks and control the flow of information. The visitors were led through a multi-tiered security system, their wills crushed by the sheer scale of the military machine. The visit lasted only a few hours, after which the civilians were hurriedly escorted to the surface. The main door slammed shut again with a deafening clang, cutting off the vault from the outside world. This brief contact with reality was the last time an outsider set foot in the bunker. Immediately after the press departed, security protocols were reinstated in an even stricter format. The audit successfully fulfilled its purpose, calming the markets and quelling the wave of conspiracy theories. The newspapers ran reassuring headlines and the public returned to its usual concerns. The government was granted a reprieve to continue using the Fort Knox image for its own purposes. The price of this reprieve was that no further inspections of this kind were planned. After 1974, the vault was sealed with final, ruthless severity. The doors of the inner compartments were sealed with special holographic seals that prevented any unnoticed entry. The very existence of the gold inside took on the character of quantum uncertainty. Since no one could open the door and look inside anymore, the actual contents became a matter of faith alone. The building began to guard not so much the metal as the secret of its possible absence. Whether the vaults were empty or full ceased to matter as long as the steel door remained closed. The authorities finally realized that true power lies in controlling access to information. Fort Knox became the perfect illustration of how a physical object is replaced by its informational copy. The granite walls remained standing, but their actual function dissolved into political abstractions. An era began in which security was ensured not by the strength of concrete, but by the depth of the information vacuum. By the 1980s, the repository building itself had become merely a small dot within a gigantic military complex. The Fort Knox Army base had grown to the size of a full-fledged city with its own internal logistics. New barracks, helicopter pads, and armored vehicle training ranges sprang up around the bunker. The facility's defense shifted definitively from the concept of sturdy walls to that of total armed dominance of the terrain. The security perimeter expanded by dozens of miles, turning the entire surrounding area into a restricted access zone. The airspace above the base was designated a closed zone, patrolled by combat aircraft around the clock. Ground access routes were controlled by multi-level checkpoints equipped with heavy weapons and facial recognition systems. Physically approaching the bunker's outer perimeter became an absolutely impossible task for anyone. The increase in armed security created a new form of tension surrounding the very fact of the facility's existence. The militarization of the perimeter required colossal budgets, which had to be justified to taxpayers. The more tanks were concentrated at the base, the more frightening the secret hidden inside seemed. The security generated suspicion, and suspicion demanded even greater reinforcement of security. The engineering structures around the bunker began to resemble the sets of a dystopian film. Concrete barriers, electrified barbed wire, and watchtowers with searchlights obscured the original 1930s facade. The aesthetics of an austere yet elegant monument gave way to the crude utilitarianism of a maximum security prison yard. Form was completely subordinated to the paranoid function of control. Meanwhile, the gold inside remained motionless, having lost all connection to reality. Its physical properties, color, malleability, weight, ceased to play any role in the global economy. The bars had turned into lines of digital code in the Ministry of Finance's databases. The bunker guarded not metal but numbers in the state registry, creating a physical illusion of their authenticity. By the start of the new millennium, the facility had reached a state of profound conceptual crisis. It was better protected than ever before in history, but the meaning of that protection had become utterly ephemeral. The building had turned into a monument to itself, maintained by an army of guards and programmers. The world had changed. Digitalization had taken over finance, leaving the old concrete cube on the sidelines of history. The events of September 11, 2001, served as the final catalyst in transforming Fort Knox into a completely closed system. The terrorist attacks on New York and Washington erased the boundaries of what was considered possible in terms of threats to infrastructure. The airspace over Kentucky was closed with unprecedented severity. All civilian flights in the vicinity were prohibited. The bunker went into a state of total defense, preparing for attacks using hijacked passenger planes. Visually, the 1930s-era building was almost completely obscured by the new layers of defense. Special nets for intercepting drones and electronic warfare systems designed to jam any signals were installed. The classic granite facade, which once graced magazine covers, was hidden behind anti-cumulative screens. Appearance ceased to matter. All that remained was the cold mathematics of survival amid chaos. The building itself has become the perfect metaphor for modern state institutions of power. On the outside, it is an ultra-strong, militarized structure that projects power and absolute confidence in the future. But inside, this power is based on an archaic foundation that no one dares to touch for fear of the system's collapse. The infrastructure of the 1930s continues to bear the symbolic weight of global hegemony. The cost of maintaining this illusion is becoming astronomical, consuming a massive portion of the country's military budget. Maintaining an entire military base solely to guard a static structure seems absurd from a logistical standpoint. Every new crisis, be it a mortgage crash or a global pandemic, only reinforces the significance of this concrete cube. When digital markets collapse, people tend to seek refuge in familiar, archaic forms of reliability. The image of a locked vault reassures the crowd, suggesting that somewhere at the bottom there is a solid foundation. The authorities sell this reassuring fairy tale to citizens, reinforcing it with the sight of tank barrels. The old granite bunker has survived, evolving from a real safe into an instrument of large-scale psychological control. It has adapted to threats, losing its original simplicity and becoming encased in the armor of paranoia. It is no longer a home for the nation's wealth. It is a castle in which the shadow of former economic might is locked away. And this castle will stand as long as people are willing to believe in its significance. This square concrete block with watchtowers continues to stand on the hills of Kentucky, surrounded by radars and machine guns. The image of eternity, sold to the public nearly a century ago, works flawlessly, projecting an idea of monolithic calm. Behind the facade of Carolina granite lies a system that has survived solely through a radical shift in its function. A vault built to hold physical weight now holds an ephemeral belief in the stability of the dollar. Systems of this scale do not break under external blows. They burn out from within when their contents lose meaning. The Fort Knox bunker continues to consume resources, electricity, and human lives simply to sustain its own myth. External strength almost always conceals colossal internal tension in matter and meaning. The true story of this place is a story about the high cost of guarding emptiness.